this man does not need any introduction, but he's been in this community for nearly 40 years and has been running Big Sky Resort for many of them. His camera's not working today, so we're going to be improvising a little bit, but we have Taylor Middleton on the line from Big Sky Resort. Taylor, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here. It's always fun following Taylor Rose because those hospital updates are really important.
Absolutely. Well, I thought, Taylor, because I was privy to you sharing this story with me, and I think it's such an important story for kind of the history of our town and the mountain. Can you describe a little bit to the audience of the phone call that you took at 3 a.m. on the morning of March 15th and kind of the subsequent dominoes that fell from that and kind of the decision-making surrounding that moment?
Yeah. You know, I've taken a lot of 3 a.m. phone calls, but that was the first one I'd ever had of that topic. The Boyne senior team across the nation had been keeping track of what was going on with COVID, and especially in the epicenter at the time, which was Europe. And Austria and Switzerland were in the process of having breakouts and closing down their resorts. And our owner, Stephen Kircher, was in Switzerland that day. And we'd been talking with other community leaders for several days here in Big Sky, assessing the situation and asking questions for which we didn't know the answers, but we were contemplating what might be happening here in the Big Sky community. But at that point, we were contemplating how we could do more social distancing and keep our community open. But then the second shoe dropped, and that was Colorado closing on Saturday. And then the governor of Colorado announced a mandatory closure. And so the Boyne team got together again and started asking the question. And we worked all night and finally decided that we were going to close down all operations for all Boyne resorts. And we didn't do that because it was a mandate. There was no governmental order. We did it because we were looking at the facts. And we wanted to be on the front end of this thing, of flattening the curve, before that phrase was even a popular phrase. But we didn't make that decision lightly because we knew the economic consequences it was going to have on these communities that we were working in and partnering with all these businesses and entrepreneurs and employees. So it was, of all the hard decisions that we've made, that was one of the hardest ones. So I crawled out of bed and decided where I was going to start my day. And I was up at the resort by about 4:45, boots on. I didn't take my boots off that day until I think 6:30. So it was a sweaty foot day. I needed flip-flops. But I started my day with ski patrol and started telling the story and talking to guests and talking to employees, and then eventually started talking to business owners in the community, letting them know how sorry I was and we were that we had made this decision, but we knew it was the right decision, but it was a hard decision. Sometimes the right decisions are the hardest ones.
No, absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing that story. That definitely is a little piece of history. That's not something that's happened to you before, and hopefully will never have to happen again. But how is the resort doing? I mean, a very generalized question, but how are you guys doing now through that transition and staff and operations? How would you classify the resort's status of health at this stage?
You know, I mentioned that the Boyne executive team had been talking about this, and the word that we were using before we knew what we were going to do is that we were going to lead whatever we needed to do in an orderly fashion so people could prepare and businesses could prepare, and it went from orderly to disorderly very quickly. And we spent the first 2 weeks trying to take care of people, trying to take care of employees, taking care of businesses, taking care of vendors, making those kind of decisions. Um, you know, our whole town, we're right in the epicenter of this thing economically, but I'm sure glad that we are not in the epicenter from the standpoint of the virus. All of you have been reading of what happened in Colorado and what happened in Sun Valley, Idaho. And they had very early cases in those places. And then they had mass spreading events going on just because they were early. But Big Sky, we as a community have been very fortunate. We do not, to the best of my knowledge or anybody's knowledge, have mass spreading going on, although we do have community spread, and although we need to be socially distancing and following Taylor Rose's tips, our community's been lucky, and for that we're really proud, and we hope it stays that way. Lucky from the standpoint of health, unlucky from the standpoint of the economy, because it does not fall on deaf ears that this is devastating, and I didn't choose that word lightly for our community economically.
Absolutely. You know, on that note, Taylor, and you guys are obviously the largest employer in town and such. I mean, can you explain how the resort is playing a role in the relief effort and any type of programs that you guys had towards the closing down of the resort, or any plans you've got moving forward in terms of being a player in the relief effort in town with local businesses or employees?
Yeah, you know, it started from the moment we started talking to employees, and we paid seasonal workers, depending on where they were in their pay schedule, a minimum of 7 days up to a couple of weeks, for them to move on to get back home. All of our seasonal workers, we encourage them to get back to their families or to get back home. And most of them got on planes or got in their cars and started moving out. We house in seasonal workforce housing over 500 employees in Big Sky. We knew that we wanted to thin out that, so although we put a mandatory move out order in place, we knew that we would need to continue to house some really good workers that did not have places to go. And we still have about 50 to 75 that are here. We had international workers here, and some of them were able to get out immediately. Some of them couldn't get out. Peru and Chile both, it became hard for them to get home. So we housed them and fed them and loved them and made sure that they were being socially distanced. And I'm really happy to report that all of our international workers have now moved on and are on their way home. Of course, we've been staying in touch with the hospital and other community organizations. Of course, we've been working with all of our employees that we have off-boarded and furloughed to help them get their economic house organized for the duration. And the duration of this thing. Is it weeks or months? Nobody knows. How long is our community going to be closed? We don't know. Nobody knows the answer to that. But Big Sky Resort, we are taking the long game, like the Kircher family has always taken with Big Sky. And we're thinking about both short-term and long-term ramifications.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having that outlook. You know, moving towards the summer, you guys recently announced that you are going to be pulling back some of the big capital improvement projects. I mean, can you give us some insight to that decision making and what that will mean for, you know, this summer and going into next winter?
Yeah. So we're used to building lifts in one summer, and you don't take out a core lift unless you're absolutely sure that lift can be replaced with something new by opening day. And with disruptions of the supply chain, we just didn't have the confidence that this lift, which we've already purchased and which has already been custom manufactured for us to replace Swift Current, we just didn't have the confidence in the supply chain that we could get it built by Thanksgiving Day. And then with the workplace environment, we weren't sure that even if the lift was completely delivered, if construction at every segment would be able to happen at the speed that it would have to happen, or if the construction workers could work safely. And then finally, of course, going back to what I was talking about a minute ago, and all of you are asking yourselves, is how long does this last? And so many businesses in this community, including ours, our revenue has dropped to zero. And so cash is king, and we're preserving all of our cash as best we can. We're canceling a lot of projects just to keep cash in the bank so we can get through summer. We can get through reopening, and we're also assuming that even when we do get reopened, that the business levels might be kind of soft. So financial planning is key right now for all businesses, and holding back on capital projects is a victim of that.
Absolutely. Can you give us kind of in general what you're hearing across the ski industry and in terms of how the industry is holding up through this, and any forecasting coming into the summer?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of information out there on what Vail is doing. Vail has canceled all capital projects across their entire network. They've laid off all of their hourly staff, tens of thousands of workers. They're protecting cash. They've quit paying dividends, but they're in it for the long game, right? And they will come out of this thing. Aspen is continuing some capital projects, but they're a very conservative stance. And Mike Kaplan was talking the other day about summer and wondering if they would get open in June or July or not ever in the summer. The bigger resort companies, including Boyne, are blessed from having come out of a few good years consecutively, and to be in good cash positions and have good banking relationships. So it's a really bad thing happening at a pretty good time economically. That's what the industry is thinking right now. It's just cinch down and be ready to play when the whistle blows and the game starts again.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question for you, Taylor, and then I'll let Joe bring up a follow-up question. Like I said, you've been in this community for 40 years, and you have known and know a lot of the business owners and operators. You've seen a lot of businesses come and go. If you had to give a piece of advice for a small business operator that's sitting in Big Sky today wondering what's going to come and when the lights might turn back on in this town, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, well, never give up. That's how I've known Martha and Anya, who are both on this call, for years. They are not quitters. I'm not a quitter. You're not a quitter. Don't give up, and hang on to your cash, and love your employees and care for them, and study these government programs that are out there, and don't give up. Don't lose heart. We're going to get through this thing, and we're going to get through it together.
Excellent. Great advice. Thank you. Joe, anything from your end?
Well, thanks, Taylor, for joining us on this. You and I had a conversation early in the afternoon on the day that the resort closed, and it was one of the more difficult interviews. It was tough. I know it was a difficult decision for you and the exec team at Boyne to make, and it was a sort of out of the body experience interviewing you for that, knowing just how difficult it was for you and for the entire community of Big Sky. What went through your head? I mean, I know there were a series of talks leading up to those decisions, but when you had to make that call and make it swiftly, what went through your head at that time?
Yeah. given the facts, as hard of a decision as it was an easy decision, because it wasn't one of these decisions where we were asking ourselves what the right thing to do was. I had quickly transitioned in my thinking to what does this mean to our employees? What does this mean to our community? How are we going to manage through this thing? So I guess I went into my automatic mode of trying to turn lemons into lemonade, right? And that's probably describes where I am and many of us are today.
Mm-hmm. Well, that positivity is really critical, for everyone in the community to hear, and that's great messaging. One last follow-up, and I don't want to get into too much speculation here. I just was curious if you guys have had these, talks at the executive level at Boyne. There are conversations about the potential of this virus rearing up again in the fall. Are you concerned about this, and are there any precautions or conversations you and the executive team at Boyne are having or talking about in the event that this could happen?
Yeah, that's the question, right, Joe? That's the hard question. Mm-hmm. Well, so the economic restart in this community, in this state, in this nation, in this world isn't going to really happen until there is an effective medical treatment figured out and an effective vaccine invented. And we've got brilliant scientists that are working on that now, and tremendous economic resources are being put forward that now. And that has to happen first. And until that happens, it's a very dynamic, fluid situation. We're playing defense right now, but as soon as those medical things that I was just talking about happen, that's when the world can start playing offense again.
Got it. Thank you very much, Taylor. I appreciate it. And thanks again for joining us today.
My pleasure.